Hi everyone, it's Raylene Bartlett from RTO Doctor for today's 30 Days, 30 Tips. Apologies again for the delay in tonight's tip. I've been a little bit busy delivering a workshop to some very special people here in Perth this evening. And I wanted to provide you with a very quick tip this evening, so it won't go for very long at all. However, a question came up today and I wanted to share it with you because I think that there might be many other people around the country who are wondering the same thing. The question was, how do I make a complaint about an RTO, or how do I make a complaint about a provider? So the question to that is pretty simple, but before you go ahead and make a complaint about a provider, you do need to make sure that this is genuinely what you want to do and that you are very serious about the allegations that you're making, because to make a complaint about a provider can cause their registration to be cancelled, suspended, and you don't want to be making allegations just because somebody's annoyed you, for example, and their registration doesn't necessarily deserve such significant penalties. So, first things first, in an environment where the regulatory bodies are very overwhelmed in the amount of work that they have to do, I think it's important to remind everybody at this point in time that ASQA, TAC and the VRQA may not investigate all complaints that they receive due to resourcing allocations. Now, at a national conference 2 years ago, I think it was, a statement was made by ASQA's regulators that they don't investigate all complaints. Some complaints will go uninvestigated, or they'll stay on file until further notice or until more evidence comes along. However, some complaints will get investigated. It really comes down to the level of risk that the complaint has on the industry and those students who are involved in the RTO. So, for example, there were a lot of complaints being made about RTOs in relation to vet fee help funding. There were a lot of complaints being made about broker and partnering arrangements and things like that. And there are still many complaints being made to the regulatory authorities in relation to complaints today. However, a lot of those complaints are going unheard. Or perhaps not unheard. Unheard is perhaps not the right word. Perhaps what the right word is uninvestigated at this time. So you want to make sure that if it is a serious complaint that you really want to be making, that you encourage any students who are affected by the issue to also lodge a complaint. You might also want to encourage industry stakeholders who are affected by the issues in the complaint to also lodge a formal complaint, and you also can lodge a formal complaint. Effectively, the more complaints that are lodged in relation to a particular provider for a particular issue will start to raise some alarm bells. Now, how can you do that? So ASQA, TAC and the VRQA all have mechanisms for lodging a complaint against providers. ASQA's website has an online complaint form, for example, and given that the majority of providers are regulated by ASQA, it seems more appropriate to provide you with the details for that. So when people make a formal complaint to ASQA in relation to an RTO's registration, it's important to know that you cannot make an anonymous complaint with ASQA and have it investigated. They make it very clear on the very first page when you start to complete your personal details that your details are mandatory and they will not investigate unless you leave your name and contact details. Something else that is really important to know is that you can ask that you remain anonymous once the investigation starts. So just because you have lodged a formal complaint and you've provided your name and contact details, you can request anonymity being maintained at all times. So on the online form, you'll be asked a range of information such as your name, contact details, what the complaint's about. If you've got any evidence, you'll be asked to upload that evidence, and ASQA will be in touch. You will most likely get an automatic reminder or acknowledgement rather, saying that thanks, we've received your complaint, we'll be investigating it. And then if you're lucky, someone might come back to you saying that the complaint is being investigated, and the RTO will subsequently get investigated. It's not likely, and from my experience, it's not very frequent that you find out what the outcome of that complaint is. Sometimes you'll receive a thank you email saying, thanks, we've received your complaint, we're investigating it, or at this time there is no further case to answer. But that's really as much information that you're likely to get back. TAC and the VRQA have very similar methods for lodging formal complaints about providers. However, once again, unless you provide the details, unless you provide your details, it's unlikely that that complaint will ever be submitted. And they don't investigate all complaints. Complaints that sometimes appear serious may not always be investigated, and sometimes we look at complaints as well and we think, wow, that really doesn't look that serious, but they'll investigate that because there have been multiple complaints of a similar nature around a period of time. So some complaints they're not able to investigate because it's outside their jurisdiction. So there'll be complaints around human resources and pay and taxation, things like that. They can't investigate those. They would be investigated by, for example, the Australian Taxation Office. If it is a complaint for an overseas student on a student visa that is an appeal, they wouldn't hear that. That would go to the Overseas Student Ombudsman, for example. If it is a complaint in relation to a breach of Australian consumer law, it's unlikely that they would hear that either. And you would go to the Small Business or Department of Commerce in your state or territory. If it's a WorkSafe issue, it's likely to come under WorkSafe and the WHS Act rather than Department of Commerce in your jurisdiction, as opposed to ASQA. So there are certain things that they can investigate, and they're usually around marketing and advertising practices and training and assessment practices of people who they regulate. That's about it for this evening's tip, and I would encourage you to please leave any comments or feedback in the comments section, as well as if you've got any suggestions for tips for upcoming sessions, to please also leave them in the comments. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.